So look, one of the best parts of Planet Forward are the storytelling expeditions we take. And we want to highlight this theme for a second and have you see some of the places we've gone.
Which is very, very exciting. So framing stories around, yes, innovation is something we do.
No, you're in the wrong place.
Right, I was like, wait a minute.
It says here, this last year we went to.
Oh, that part. See,
okay.
It's highlighted, right? Yep, here we are. This last year, we went to Arizona to research on short stature corn and visit the University of Arizona's Biosphere 2 and Hopi farmer, is that coming up? Nope. Scientist Michael Johnson. I thought it was coming up. It might come up. We'll see.
Okay. We also went to, we mentioned this, we went to, and we're highlighting this because really one of the really cool things is to go with students and to see and to learn and then to watch that the connections get made and the stories get told. So we went to Dearborn, Michigan, to the Ford F-150 plant, as I mentioned earlier, to learn about EVs, battery technologies, the transition. You'll be seeing those stories coming up in the next week or so. They're, as Owen indicated when he was talking, going through the final approval stages.
And Iceland, with National Geographic Lindblad expeditions to visit a place that produces virtually all of its energy from renewable sources, 80% from hydro and 20% from geothermal.
And Amy Berquist and Alex Steely-Clark are here with us today.
Linda, hi.
And
hello.
There, so wave to them from Lindblad. So thank you guys for everything that Lindblad does.
Thank you.
Really, really appreciate it. Yay. We'll be going with you this summer. So while we were in Iceland this past summer, when we were back on land, we paid a fascinating visit to a company called CarbFix. They're working to mineralize carbon dioxide. Anybody heard about that? So this is basically to put it back in the ground. They handed us a rock, and they said this is actually carbon dioxide when it's mineralized, when it's turned back into rock. The story, like the technology, is built on a ton of science, engineering, data, geology. It's very technical, very complicated. So how you boil that down into a story so that it makes sense to people is a challenge. And that was quite something to see and visit.
Yeah. Haley Hughes from the University of Arizona, a StoryFest winner who traveled with us last year, she connected back up with a CarbFix engineer.
So we'll take a look at that and then we'll come back and talk about this kind of thing.
Hi Sig, it's great to see you again.
Hi Hallie, how have you been?
I've been great. How does it feel speaking at the Planet Forward 2024 Summit?
It's very exciting. I'm very happy y'all had me out here. And it's great to see you again after your trip here from last year. How did you like seeing the igloos in person?
The igloos in Iceland were super cool. It was one of my favorite parts of the StoryFest trip in Iceland. So super excited to be able to talk about that today. So who do you work for and what does your company do?
I work for CarbFix, and we are in the business of turning CO2 into stone, and with the goal of being a significant contributor to climate recovery through the worldwide scaling and development of our technology and furthering underground CO2 mineral storage as a whole. CarbFix was spun out of an idea from the president of Iceland back in 2007, and the idea behind it was just to see if we could take CO2, dissolve it in water, and then pump it underground and see if it permanently would stay. And about 10 to 12 years ago, they had the first pilot project, and they proved that it does work, and remarkably fast. Within 2 years, over 90% of the CO2 had been mineralized.
I've heard that one of CarbFix's big projects is Project Seastone, which is super highly technical. Could you take us through the story of what you're doing and what you're trying to accomplish?
Project Seastone is kind of the next chapter in CarbFix's story. Whereas 15 years ago, CarbFix set out to take fresh water and CO2 and turn it into stone underground. Seastone is now trying to use salt water, such as seawater, and do the exact same thing.
So why seawater? What are the challenges that you're trying to address or overcome?
Our goal is to be a positive impact, and we're very aware of any parts of our process that could potentially be not as beneficial as we would like it. With Seastone, we can go to areas with the right geology, such as India or Indonesia or over in the States, and take seawater instead of fresh water that would be drawn from the reservoir, or allay anybody's fears with using drinking water resources. And then we can scale up and up and up with plenty of seawater around.
So thank you so much, Sig, for sitting down with us and talking all about CarbFix. I'm sure the StoryFest finalists are so excited to go back to Iceland and experience all the amazing things that Iceland has to offer. And I'm sure we'll be excited to follow CarbFix's journey in the future.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure. And we really look forward to, if you get the opportunity, come back out.
That was cool.
Right?
That was cool.
We've been invited back to CarbFix, and we'll go and we'll see what they're doing. They're going to be doing a huge pilot program next year. A couple of points of clarification. They point out that there are only 2% of the world's surfaces where this would work. It's a basalt rock that this needs to go into. A lot in Iceland, a couple of other locations around the world. This is not a silver bullet. This is not going to solve the climate crisis. It's actually very controversial in some quarters because they say if you create this illusion that you can just take all the bad stuff out of the air and put it, there's no incentive to stop putting more bad stuff into the air.
Absolutely.
So point that out. But it's a part of the array of things that people are doing to address the crisis and the stories we need to tell.
Which is really important. So we're going to go into our next panel, and I want you all to start thinking, how does data, numbers, statistics, facts propel a story to make it credible, urgent, human, and real?
And how do we contextualize them? How do we do this? So one of the things that we talk a lot about in storytelling, right? What is 1 part per million? What's a kilowatt? You can't touch it, you can't see it. How do you convey that to people so it's real? We talk about this with a great metaphor. I'm sure many of you have heard about it with the carbon in the atmosphere. We think about it like a bathtub, right? The water is flowing, the bathtub is overflowing. So turning the water down doesn't solve the problem. Turning it off doesn't solve the problem. You've also got to drain it, and you've got to clean up the mess you've made. So this is what we face with our air. So,
Yeah, as you hear this conversation, I want you to think about why numbers matter and how you use them as story. How much can you fit before it's too overwhelming and you lose your audience? So please welcome our moderator, Matt Scott, Director of Storytelling and Engagement with Project Drawdown, Dr. Neelu Tummala, co-director of the GW Climate Health Institute.
Juan Declet-Barreto, he's with the Union of Concerned Scientists, and Anna Shah, also with George Washington University, for a terrific conversation. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Neelu, you were amazing in the video and in the conversation last night, so welcome back, and we're anxious to hear the conversation. Matt, it's always great to see you. Matt is also a member of the Planet Forward Advisory Council. He's at Project Drawdown. He's a rock star, so enjoy.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much. How's everyone doing today? Good, good. And as Frank said, I'm Matt Scott. I'm the Director of Storytelling and Engagement at the global nonprofit Climate Solutions Resource Project Drawdown. I host a series called Drawdown's Neighborhood there. And I'm part of the Planet Forward Advisory Council, as Frank said, but Frank wouldn't let me live down the fact that I need to mention that I'm a 2014 GW alum. So happy to be in good company. Yeah, cheers, there we go. And we're gonna dive in for this conversation today. But one thing I wanna invite all of you to do, first and foremost, is think about questions that you have for us, because about halfway through, or in about 10 minutes or so, we're going to pause to start to get some questions from you all. But also, I want you to think about what comes to mind when you think of data. What are the feelings, the words, the thoughts? Does anyone here, like just by a cheer, like love data? Is anyone here terrified of data? Those are my people, but hopefully after this conversation, we'll get over that a little bit together. So first and foremost, I just want to invite our phenomenal panelists to introduce themselves. And could you just share who you are and, in short, like a sentence or two, how are you using stories to bring data to life in your work? Starting with you, Juan.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Juan Declet-Barreto. I'm a geographer by training. I'm a senior social scientist for climate vulnerability with the Union of Concerned Scientists. Actually, my office is really here down the road. In my work, I combine climate change data, extreme weather impacts data, and population vulnerability data to communicate to the public and to policymakers the depths of the climate crisis, the need to act on climate to reduce the emissions that are causing the climate crisis, and also to adapt to the climate impacts that we can't avoid even if we shut off those emissions, as the metaphor that Frank used earlier.
Awesome.
Thank you.
And by the way, while it's up, since we're taking a look at it, do you just want to explain what the visual is that we're seeing from the Union of Concerned Scientists?
Oh, right.
Yeah.
It's right here. In our work, we can take the data that I talked about in terms of extreme weather data, the climate signal of heat alerts, for example, and communicate to the public that, for example, last year, during what we call danger season, which is the period between May and October, when climate change has made extreme weather more likely, that 96% of people in the United States face an extreme weather alert. I think if we have time, we may be able to play an animation to show you rather than tell you how we communicate this.
Let's see.
Let's see. This will take 2 minutes. I think we can continue talking through this, where we have been able to combine the data from the National Weather Service Alert Service, and take a look at how these extreme weather events unfolded over the U.S. and the Caribbean territories, where we looked at floods, storms, heat, and fire weather. And you will see we will slow down around some areas, and around some events. For example, the terrible heat wave in Puerto Rico, that widespread heat wave that started in the U.S. Southwest and continued spreading in the early summer, putting millions and millions of people at risk and under these alerts. Phoenix, in particular, lit up in the map and made the news rounds last year when it had 31 consecutive days of temperatures over 110 Fahrenheit.
Wow.
The terrible wildfires in Maui, of course, that caused a lot of damage and destruction and death. And we will be coming up on Hurricane Hillary, which prompted really freaky sounding hurricane flood alerts in Nevada, as far as Utah, and in Arizona and parts of California, which is a little bit mind-boggling to think about. And Hurricane Idalia in Florida, which also combined with heat wave alerts on some parts of Florida and hurricane alerts simultaneously.
Wow, there we go. And I think what's so powerful about this one is not only the data visualization with the example that you gave, but also you mentioned the heat in Phoenix. And I think of stories. I think of my friends living in Phoenix who were talking about that and telling me, hey, maybe if you're visiting, don't come until like February when it's not 99 or 110 degrees or so. But as we go along, Neelu, do you just want to introduce yourself? And I think we could also show the visuals that you prepared also.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Neelu Tummala. I'm an ear, nose, and throat physician and co-director of the Climate Health Institute here at GW. And one of the other hats I wear is I'm a part of Virginia Clinicians for Climate Action, which is a group of healthcare professionals who advocate for climate solutions in Virginia. Anyone here pre-med, nursing, dentistry, anything medical? Oh, man. Well, lucky for you, you're in the corner. Well, health affects everyone, right? And so when we think about data, what is data representing? It's representing people. And who are the people? People is everyone. People are the patients that I see in my clinic. People are your brothers, your sisters, your parents, your children. And so as a healthcare provider, one of the things that the healthcare movement is really growing in appreciation of is how do all of these climate extremes impact our patients and impact our patients' health. And a lot of healthcare professionals are increasingly recognizing that our Hippocratic Oath is to do no harm, that we have to speak up on behalf of global warming, air pollution, and all of the negative health impacts this is causing our patients. So, as Juan was showing that video, we're looking at all of these different health risks, right? Heat, floods, droughts, hurricanes, wildfire seasons. Last summer when the northern Canada had the intense wildfire season and all that smoke blanketed the DMV, I had patients calling in being concerned about could they go outside? What would their breathing be like? Was it safe for them to take their children outside? Everyone was impacted by these respiratory concerns, and people felt it in their own homes. And as we saw with continued global warming, with these worsening heat extremes, climate extremes, we're going to be seeing worsening public health impacts. And so it's really taking the data that we have and saying this data is impacting people, and we are all the people, it's all of our health that's going to be impacted. But of course, we know that it's anyone who already have underlying health conditions, babies and children, older adults. These are the folks that are going to be most impacted by these negative health concerns. And so when we think about data, the first image that I had was from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And so one of the things that a lot of people ask about is, well, what really does 1.1 degrees Celsius, 1.2 degrees Celsius, 2 degrees Fahrenheit, what does that mean? And so this is a graphic I use a lot when I'm talking about the concerns I have as a clinician is, we know that with every fraction of a degree increase, there's going to be worsening heat extremes, right? 2023 was the hottest year on record. January, February, and March of this year have broken records for being their hottest respective months. But these aren't just numbers, these aren't just data. These are things that people are experiencing. I had a patient in my clinic last week, and I remember last summer, she lives on the top floor of her apartment, and she had talked to me about how hard it was to live during the summer. And she was like, Dr. Tummala, I'm so nervous and scared about what this summer is gonna look like. So, right, these are the real consequences that I'm sure many of you have also felt yourselves, but that I'm seeing as a healthcare provider.
Awesome, thank you so much. And I know you also had, I know there's one other visual that's loaded up too, but could you just speak to this too?
Yeah, so one of the things that I think there's a little bit of lack of awareness of is all of the different ways that climate change is impacting health. And so it's, we talked about the climate-related disasters. As an ENT, I care a lot about how it's worsening pollen allergies, which can also increase asthma exacerbations, worsening mental health concerns, and then one of the other areas is worsening infectious disease. And so again, using the data that we have and showing how this applies or is applicable to our health, this is a graphic that's showing how West Nile virus is going to change by 2050 or by 2080. And changes in temperature and precipitation patterns are going to increase the prevalence of West Nile virus with the northward rise. So really, again, and we're seeing the same pattern with pollen allergies, is that as temperatures and precipitation patterns change, the environment that people are living in is changing, and so the risks are going to change. And these are things that as healthcare providers, we also have to be conscientious of, because we need to know how do we treat our patients. I have a friend who's a pediatrician. She told me last December she saw 2 patients with Lyme disease, which is not that common in Virginia. But again, as our environment's changing, we're seeing the changing landscape of infectious diseases, which is impacting patients and which us as healthcare providers need to be aware of so we can treat accordingly.
It's powerful just to hear about these experienced realities that we have when it comes to all this, where we could just talk about the data and talk about these things in the bigger picture. I know with Project Drawdown, a science-based, data-based organization, we could talk about climate solutions in that sense, but when we talk about the people who are working on them or the people who are experiencing the climate impacts, that connects with all of us so much more because we could relate to going outside and overheating and so on and so forth. But Anna, one thing I want you to do, of course, is to introduce yourself, but I love about your work that you are, as we'll show in a bit, using data a bit differently, or in a few ways, actually, I guess, to inform what you're doing, but go for it.
Okay, so hello everybody. My name is Anna Shah. I'm a senior here at GW, so graduating in a month in the business school, studying international business with minors in sustainability and German. But the reason why I'm on this panel is because I founded a student thrift store on campus called POP, which stands for Power of the Purse, to really empower shoppers to use their dollars to shop sustainably versus Shein as an example. Our mission statement is really to provide students access to affordable and curated secondhand fashion. So as I'm a solo entrepreneur at the moment, I think what's really important is that I use the community as my co-founders and help them craft the vision of what this thrift store is gonna look like. So I spent the fall interviewing a bunch of girls on campus, 45, and these were kind of the main trends that I was able to kind of ascertain from what they were saying. So looking for affordability, preferring in-person shopping, a curated treasure hunt, and stuff like that, and that they're participating in the circular economy and want to donate clothes that they haven't used recently. And so these kind of trends and qualities that I'm seeing in my customers are helping me craft the vision of what this thrift store is going to look like. And GW GW recently offered me a space to do it permanently and launch by fall 2025, but ultimately, I think it's really important that I use that data to craft the vision of what the thrift store looks like. And not only that, but use it to curate a thrift store that's accessible to all. I think sustainability can sometimes be hard to approach because there's a lot of a shaming culture around it. And I think really what I want to do with Pop is have it be a place of empowerment, a place where someone who has never thrifted before can come in and find a place and find it be accessible to them. And we have all these cool collections that are curated for college students, and the price point's really affordable. So I really want it to be a safe space and a community, and that's why I chose the community to collect my data from.
I love that. And before we get to a few questions, maybe we'll have time for a couple of questions in a bit. I actually just want to start with you, Anna. Like, what do we gain by using stories, or why isn't it effective when we just use data alone in our approach?
So I think for me, I interviewed each of these people rather than doing a survey. And I think those stories are so relevant in my mind as I'm crafting this vision. So for example, people were telling me how in high school, there was always written or unwritten rules about what you should wear, and that college is really the first time they get to express themselves through the style. And that's something that I want to be able to give to them, to even stories about how in certain stores they don't feel included because only American music is on the playlist. And there are all these different stories that I've heard from people as I'm interviewing them and taking them on focus groups. And ultimately, that's kind of what's crafting the larger vision. It's all these little details about what's personal to them, and then kind of drawing the threads and patterns to create a larger vision.
Yeah, I'm wondering how that resonates with you, Juan and Neelu, if one of you wants to kind of share why it's so critical that we have the stories in addition to the data, right?
Well, I think, for example, there's multiple scales of engagement, right? The maps that I showed are at a county scale, so like a national type of extent, right? And then at the other end of that are, for example, the stories that Dr. Tummala was talking about at the individual level, right? Somewhere in between there, there's also communities that are experiencing these impacts. A big part of our work as a Union of Concerned Scientists to bring in those communities, not bring them in at the tail end of a project, but bring them in at the beginning of a project to start scoping it out correctly, to take concerns, needs, historical and current needs and demands into account, and combining the hard data with the lived experience, as you were talking about, which is a very, very important component of non-credentialed experts, by which I mean people who do not have academic degrees have expertise in their own neighborhoods. Yeah. They know their environmental histories. They know they may have ancestral knowledge, indigenous knowledge that goes back far in time, and they do understand what their pressing needs of their communities are, and that's integral when you talk, when you want to talk about solutions that can consider that.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, especially because in the work that I do at Project Drawdown, so much of that is interviewing people who are in the communities, primarily from underrepresented communities, and you hear all these realities that, it's people just sharing their stories, but the thing that I love about it is that it, unintentionally represents the data. Like, you see the data reflected of so many realities when it comes to climate and environmental impacts, but also just a ton of realities they face with racism and inequality and class and the like. But Neelu, I think I'd love to hear from you too with your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that was said. I think one of the things that data really allows me to do is create a new narrative by connecting the dots between what the data and the science is showing, which I love as a physician, but then also what people are feeling and how they can apply that to themselves. And so if I have someone come in and, it's early March and they're like, gosh, I feel like my pollen allergies are getting worse. Well, I can create the dots and say, okay, well, the data shows that there's 20% more pollen in the air now than there was 30 years ago. The pollen season is X number of weeks longer in this area. In the DMV, it's about 3 weeks longer, just an FYI, than it was 30 years ago. So we can create that narrative to help people gain a better understanding, and then hopefully they can take that information and talk to their friends and family about it to say, okay, this is how climate change is impacting me here now, and then all of my, my community members who also may have pollen allergies. So it's just one example of really just making it more applicable, and sort of to your point of making everything just feel like it's more like everyone's part of the story, everyone's welcome, and it just really helps people understand where they're at and unfortunately with health, it's how it's negatively impacting them, but then also what we can do to improve our current environment.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question for you. Are you currently open for appointments? Because struggling with the pollen for sure these
Pollen's
last
bad,
few weeks.
yes.
But I want to see if any folks have questions, and I'm seeing right over here, Mark. I know there's a question. If we could get a mic down. Oh yeah, there we go.
Hi there, Mark Lichtenstein from ESF. Much has been written about the death of truth and the death of facts. So Matt, I know you deal with this a lot, but I would like to get some feedback on how we even talk about the validity of data, because now, Anna, your data is pretty straightforward. You went out and interviewed people, right? But what about the data around climate change is human created? So how do we deal with this movement against truth, fact, and the validity of data?
We have to recognize that there is a very well-funded and decided effort from climate deniers and the fossil fuel industry to discredit the science that has been established. 99% of the international scientific community understands and recognizes as valid. We can't use that fact to discredit the very real fears that people who have fallen prey to that misinformation and disinformation and lies. They have legitimate concerns and fears, and we have a responsibility to bring in the most trusted messengers into that conversation. I talked to the National Hispanic Association of Nurses the other day, and many of us probably know here, I'm sure Dr. Tummala knows that nurses and medical professionals are among the most trusted messengers, communicators of information across the board, certainly more than politicians, certainly more than scientists, and that is a key way in which we should work together. All scientists, scholars, advocates across the board to communicate the messages on facts on climate change that can help sway people and recognize how things are impacting them.
I think I was also going to add, I think it's like, especially with telling stories, it's about making it human-centered. You know, there's all these statistics, but when you see your patients actually living them, you know, that's what compels people to believe in the narrative and see it as larger picture when they see the personal effects and the personal stories that Planet Forward does such a great job of sharing.
And I'd say from a health angle, a lot of the leading medical journals are publishing a lot on this. Lancet, New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA, all of them have really been, over the past couple of years, really been focusing on climate change, global warming, air pollution, and literature related to that and how it impacts certain populations, environmental inequities, and just health risks in general. So it's really helpful to have that really robust objective data and then to apply that to a greater population.
Yeah.
I think not just that. You know, we need on top of all of that, we need to talk to people about the things that they care about. Only a few people care about how many standard deviations the mean, the temperature of the mean. You know, only a few nerds like myself and some of the people that we talk to. People care about if their kids are going to be able to play soccer or football or play outside, if they're not going to have an asthma attack because their quality index is too high, or if it's too hot, like we were fortunately seen happening in many places around the country.
Yeah, that's powerful. And I know I see one hand with a question, if we could get a mic right over there. That was the first hand I saw. And yeah, we have time for one more question.
University of Georgia. I was just wondering, how do you combat the argument that your data and your publications might be insinuating climate doom or something of the sort, climate extremism, when in reality you're just relaying the data?
That's a great question. And I think, I love this question. As someone who works at an organization that's focused on climate solutions, that doesn't mean that we don't talk about the crisis and the problems and the realities of the data that's presented, but that we tell what I think of as a more full story, the story not only of the problem, but of the solutions. And I love how our executive director at Project Drawdown, John Foley, talks about the analogy of going to the doctor, and they tell you your diagnosis, but they don't tell you what you could do about it. That's what happens so often with the ways we communicate about these issues we're here to discuss today. And but I'm curious from your perspective about that question. Do you grapple with maybe giving the sense of doom through showing the data, or are there opportunities to show solutions, which I know is one of the huge themes of today?
There's all of that included. The magnitude of the climate crisis is such that sometimes, some of us get into that doom and gloom sort of mode. But that's not what I want to leave anybody with. There are solutions. This is a human-caused problem, and there are human solutions, and we need the political will. That's what's missing. We can argue about the technologies and the methods to do it, but we need the political will. And I would push back against the people who say that the climate that scientists are extremists by saying, well, the extremists are the ones who expect humanity and a sizable chunk of humanity, especially vulnerable people, to deal with the consequences of climate change, to lose their lives and their livelihoods and the ways that they are able to feed their families. That's a really kind of toxic extremism that we are supposed to just take lying down. That is not correct, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, just as we wrap up, I want to ask for just some really quick, tangible advice. If there are people here who have the data but are trying to figure out how to bring that to life through stories, is there any quick advice that you all would want to share? Maybe beginning with you, Neelu?
Sure. So also just to answer your question, I think that one thing, I used to do 90% talk about the problem, 10% let's talk about the solution. Now I'm 1/3 problem, 2/3 solution. Because getting to your point, you have to lay out the problem, but then to give people tangible solutions on a macro and micro level, so things that feel like something they can do on a day-to-day basis, but then vote and work for climate policy, macro level type stuff. So I think the biggest thing for me is think about your health, think about the health of the people that you love, and then just sort of talk about how climate change is impacting health, right? This all goes back to raising awareness, talking about it, because this is one of those ways to really connect with people in a nonpartisan way, the public health concerns, because it is impacting everyone.
Awesome. Yeah, quick advice, Anna.
I think I could have talked a lot about 10% of climate emissions are from the fashion industry and all the big problems with fast fashion, but I tried to focus on the solution that I'm creating today as something to provide hope, because I think that it really is a lot of gloom and doom by focusing so much on the negative and the problem, and I love the way you kind of described just 1/3 and then 2/3, but kind of end it with the positive notes and how much there really is being done on the positive front. It's incredible. There's so much data about the future and all the solutions we can bring, so making sure to always kind of lay that out, lay the problem out, but then going into all the possibilities that are open in the solution.
Juan, a few words before we get kicked off the stage.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to this conversation. Like I said, I want people to go home with the message that there are solutions to this problem. We just need to create the political will to do it, to put people in office that recognize the validity of climate change and climate science and the fact that it's a crisis. That's the only way we're going to get out of this.
Yeah, and I would just add, the last piece, representation matters. The messengers matter. Who we have represented in stories matters. So let's be sure that we take that seriously and leverage that in what we do. Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you for the space to be here today.
Thank you all. Thank you. Neelu, I want to steal you for just a second before you go. The others can go, because the other thing that you can go. It's all right. No, but you're not just a doc, and I think my pollen allergies are okay right now, so check me. But you're a storyteller yourself, right? So just tell people how you write, what and why.
So when I was in medical school and training, I never really thought about that climate change would really be sort of a part of what I did as a healthcare provider. And this kind of goes back to what I was saying about do no harm, right? I think over the years, I've really appreciated that if I really want to take care of my patients, the environmental risks are such a significant concern, I have to be doing something about them. And we know with climate change that one of the main things we can do is talk about it and then, again, connect those dots between here's how climate change is impacting health, and then here's what we have to do about it. So I started writing a few years ago, and really, what inspired me was the people I was seeing in my clinic. Those people asking me about their airway, about their asthma exacerbations, about their pollen allergies. It was patients I was talking to about their heat extremes that they were concerned about over the summer months. And what I really wanted to do was elevate their stories. And then there's so much data that supports what they're saying. And so it's really just trying to create that narrative. And so again, I see what I do as a climate advocate as an extension of what I do as a physician. So for me, it's like one and the same. And it's really just sort of raising awareness to say, this is a public health risk. We know what we need to do about it. And as Juan was saying, that part of the communication strategy is to create public will to be able to implement the policy changes.
So you're a storyteller too.
Again, I'm telling the stories of my patients. That's really what it comes down
Great.
to.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thanks, Frank.
All right.
Yeah.
I just want to button this conversation about data for a second. So for those of you who have written stories to publish, or for those of you who are thinking about how you tell a story to communicate, you're writing an internal memo to a boss, you're writing a pitch for an idea or a project, you're writing a paper for a class, you need to start with the data and come back to it. You want to check yourself. Is your assumption or the way you're thinking about framing this story actually correct? Do the data support your own ideas? Before you turn it into a narrative, is the science, the data, the statistics on your side? Which ones, as you see, what you've got there, will leap at you? 96% of the population was at risk of heat in the last year. That's a number that pops. That's a great thing to put in a story. You can't put too many. If you bury people in numbers, they lose the story, they lose the narrative, and now you're just giving them a laundry list. Generally speaking, people don't remember a lot of numbers. They'll remember a few. They'll certainly remember them with relation to other people. So when you make that connection. When I was at CNN and I was doing a story, our typical TV story was around somewhere between 1:45 and 2:30. We seldom used more than 3 numbers, and we almost always built a graphic around them. So not only did people hear the number, but they could see it at the same time. So you're using 2 senses, their sight and their hearing, so that you're reinforcing that. Don't ever put up a number on a screen with text or numbers and say something different if you're doing a video piece, because then you're asking people to hear one thing and see another, and it becomes very confusing for your audience. So use your data to check yourself, to build your narrative, and then weave it in to support the narrative. Super, super important. One final thing, and then we move on to the next bit. There is a difference in your storytelling between the issue and the story. So the issue may be childhood asthma caused by heat, but the story is about a mom with her kid who plays soccer who can't go outside. So you've got to find that narrative within that issue if you're actually going to turn it into a story. And that's the same whether you're a filmmaker or you're writing a memo or a science paper. If you want to highlight that narrative, you've got to build that story around a story, not just a piece of data or information. Does that make sense? It's a really tricky thing to do sometimes because we want to tell the story about childhood asthma, but we've got much more to do.